Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Get comfortable and relax. Story 1. I grew up with my mum and dad in a quiet town called Chandler, Arizona. Life was pretty steady. My dad worked in accounting, my mum ran her own real estate business, and I spent my days playing sports and enjoying the Arizona sun. We weren't a picture-perfect family, but we got along well. My dad and I grew closer when I started playing soccer. He'd always hoped I'd enjoy sports like he did, and while I was never the girliest girl around, I still liked going shopping with my mom or spending quiet days with her at home. We had a good balance, I guess. At 18, I was still figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, uncertain about college or work, and my parents had just started talking about moving, possibly to California. I didn't have many close friends, and a recent breakup had left me even more detached. When my parents said we might be heading to San Diego, I didn't resist. A fresh start sounded nice. A few weeks after the moving talks began, my parents took a long weekend to visit San Diego and check out a few properties. That left me alone in the house for the first time. I wasn't nervous, just a bit uncertain about the silence that would settle in once they left. That morning I did some shopping downtown and returned around 3:30 in the afternoon. After putting away the clothes I bought, I went for a swim in our small backyard pool. The weather was still warm, and floating in the water felt like the perfect way to unwind. That's when my phone rang. It was my dad. He reminded me that it was Halloween, October 31st. I laughed. I'd nearly forgotten. We reminisced about the years we dressed up together, going door to door in costumes. I had stopped trick-or-treating when I turned 15, but I still enjoyed Halloween. Since Mum and Dad weren't home, it was up to me to hand out candy. Dad told me to check the cupboard above the fridge for sweets and to put out the battery-powered pumpkin by the front door. He reminded me to switch it on before evening. "Don't worry, Dad," I said with a grin. "I'll handle all the zombies and werewolves tonight." After the call, I dried off, showered, and got dressed. Then I found my old horror makeup kit, painted my face like a skeleton, and put on a black outfit. Before the kids started arriving, I tossed a frozen pizza in the oven. That's when I remembered the pumpkin. It was stored in the garage, on one of the higher shelves. I found a wooden box, climbed on it, and stretched up on tiptoe to reach the pumpkin. I grabbed it, but then something happened. I lost my balance. I don't remember exactly how I fell, only that I hit my head on the way down. Everything went dark. When I woke up, I was on the garage floor. My head was throbbing and I felt dazed, weak. I looked at my watch and realized I had been unconscious for half an hour. I tried to laugh it off, told myself it was nothing, just a bump on the head. But something didn't feel right. I felt detached, like I was half inside my body and half outside of it. Suddenly the doorbell rang, followed by the sound of excited kids shouting, "Trick or treat!" I stumbled out of the garage, made my way to the kitchen, grabbed some candy and opened the door. 4 kids stood there, dressed as zombies and vampires. One boy looked at me and said, "Cool skeleton, I like your fake blood." I froze. I hadn't used any fake blood. I touched my face and there it was. Sticky, dark red, real blood. I didn't explain. I just dropped candy into their buckets and closed the door. I went back to the living room and sat down, rubbing my temples. My head still ached and everything felt strange, like I was moving through fog. I closed my eyes, just for a moment. A loud knock jolted me awake. It was 8:30 p.m. I'd fallen asleep for about an hour. Again, the knock came, louder this time. 3 sharp bangs. I got up and approached the door, feeling uneasy. As I neared it, I noticed a cold draft coming from underneath. My skin prickled, the hairs on my arms stood up. Something felt wrong. I paused. Then another round of loud knocks echoed through the hallway. I took a breath and looked through the peephole. What I saw sent a shiver down my spine. A tall figure stood on the porch, dressed in black with a hood pulled low over its face. I couldn't make out any features, just the shadow of a presence. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stood there. I started to back away from the door, but then my hand, without my permission, reached forward, unlocked it, and began to open it. I wasn't in control. My body felt like it belonged to someone else. The door creaked open, and the figure stepped forward. The air changed. The smell of something sour and rotten hit my nose. I tried to scream, but my voice came out as a whisper. The figure loomed closer. I was frozen, my limbs stiff, my brain screaming for me to run, to move, to do anything, but I couldn't. Then I blacked out. When I came to, I was lying on the couch. My mum and dad were there, panicked, leaning over me. My mum pressed an ice pack against my head. There was a bandage on my forehead. I was confused. They told me I had a concussion from the fall in the garage. Apparently, I hadn't cleaned the wound properly. They'd found me passed out and rushed me to the hospital. Everything else, the figure, the knocking, the door opening by itself, it was brushed off as a hallucination, a dream caused by the head injury. But I knew what I saw. I knew how real it felt. I could still remember the chill of the air, the smell, the way my body moved on its own. It wasn't a dream. It felt like something had come into the house that night, something I hadn't invited. And though I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was all part of the concussion, some part of me remained haunted by that tall, silent figure in the hood. The memory lingered like smoke. That Halloween changed everything. I never looked at my house the same way again. And even now, every October, when the leaves start to fall and the air turns crisp, I feel that same sense of dread creeping up my spine. Like it's still out there, waiting. Story 2. It had been raining all day, the kind of rain that turns sidewalks into rivers and the air into something heavy you can barely breathe. I remember standing at the edge of a soaked football field, miserable and cold. My little brother's soccer tournament was dragging on, and I was 16, stuck there silently begging time to move faster. It was the kind of day that felt grey in every way, clouds, clothes, mood. As much as I cared about my brother, watching him roll around in the mud wasn't exactly my idea of a thrilling Friday. We lived in the northeast of Great Britain, and the cold stuck to your bones like an old grudge. By the time we got home that evening, I was soaked, tired, and ready to spend the night curled up under a blanket. My brother, proud of the mud he'd worn like armor, thought it was hilarious to rub his damp shorts against my jeans before heading upstairs. Mum and Dad announced they were going out for the evening. My brother had plans to sleep over at his friend's house, one of his teammates from the game. They practically had a permanent pillow waiting for each other on weekends. As Dad turned to me and said, "Unless you want to come with us, you're staying home alone tonight," I just nodded. I didn't mind. I preferred the idea of an empty house, over sitting awkwardly while my parents had dinner. I was used to solitude. Our house sat on the edge of town, quiet and tucked away. Grandma lived a couple of miles down the road, but aside from her, there wasn't much around. At 16, I was starting to crave independence, and a night to myself felt like a little taste of adulthood. Still, I remember thinking it was strange how quickly the silence wrapped around the house once they all left. Usually there was noise, my brother shouting, TV blaring, or my dad walking around humming old songs, but now there was nothing, just the steady sound of rain tapping against the windows, like a soft warning. I headed upstairs to shower, still wearing a layer of damp clothes and annoyance. When I stepped out, warm and dry, I realized I hadn't even heard them leave. No goodbye, no be safe, just a vanishing act. I shrugged it off and got into my pajamas, trying to shake the uneasiness creeping in. It wasn't fear, exactly, just a strange stillness, the kind you feel when something is just slightly off. I went downstairs to the kitchen and made a simple dinner. I don't remember exactly what it was, maybe baked beans and toast or a quick sandwich. It didn't matter, I just needed something warm to fill the space. By then it was around 7 p.m, and the rain hadn't let up. The house felt darker than usual, like the clouds outside had swallowed what little light remained. I curled up on the couch with the TV on low, trying to pretend the evening was just like any other. I kept glancing at the clock, expecting my parents to be back by 11 at the latest. They were the kind of couple who still held hands and occasionally laughed too loudly in public, but they weren't partygoers, no clubs, no late-night bars, just dinner and home. That was their rhythm. About 8 p.m, the phone rang. Now, I have to say, nobody ever called our house phone. In fact, we joked that it was more of a decoration than anything else. Everyone used mobiles. I stared at it ringing, unsure of whether to answer. Eventually it stopped and went to voicemail. We had one of those phones where you could hear the message as it played. What came next sent a chill crawling up my spine. Breathing, just breathing. No words, no cough, no background noise. Just the slow, heavy inhale and exhale of someone on the other end of the line. It was the kind of sound that doesn't feel human, like something trying to sound human. I turned the volume down, trying to convince myself it was a prank. Maybe someone dialed the wrong number. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence. A minute later, the phone rang again. This time, I didn't move. I just sat there and let it ring until the voicemail picked up again. The same breathing, only this time it was louder, more deliberate, mixed with soft grunts. It didn't sound like someone who was lost or confused. It sounded like someone who was watching. I was frozen. I started scanning the windows, checking every blind, making sure the doors were locked. I even turned off the kitchen light so the reflections wouldn't give away where I was. Then my mobile buzzed. I jumped, nearly dropping it. It was my mum. I answered immediately. Her voice was panicked, breathless. "Layla, go to Grandma's. Right now. An ambulance is on the way." My heart dropped. "What happened?" I asked, already standing. "She collapsed in the kitchen. She managed to call, but she can't talk. Go, now." I didn't ask any more questions. I pulled on a jacket, slipped into my sneakers and ran out into the rain. The cold hit me like a slap, but I didn't slow down. It took me about 15 minutes to get there, my legs burning and lungs stinging from the cold air. As I turned the corner to her street, I saw the flashing lights of the ambulance. Grandma had suffered a stroke. They said she must have dragged herself across the floor to reach the phone. She couldn't speak, but she had the strength to call for help. My mum had received the call from the hospital, and when she saw a missed call from our landline, she panicked. She tried to call me but hadn't gotten through, so she drove as fast as she could to the hospital, and that's when she called my mobile. Her instincts were right. Something about the night wasn't normal. Grandma survived, but she never fully recovered. The stroke changed her, made her quiet and distant, but that night stayed with me. It wasn't just the timing of the calls, it was the feeling in the house, the oppressive quiet, the shadows that stretched too far, the breath on the phone that wasn't mine. I told my mum about the strange voicemails, but she dismissed it as a prank. Maybe she was right, but in my gut, I felt like the two events were connected. Like the breathing wasn't just someone messing around, but something darker, something drawn to silence, to solitude. Over the next few weeks, I avoided staying home alone. I'd go out of my way to make sure someone was always with me. Even the house felt different, like it had absorbed something that night. My brother laughed at me, called me dramatic, but I started sleeping with my mobile under my pillow and the lights on in the hallway. One night, about a month later, the phone rang again. It was 2:13 a.m. I let it go to voicemail. No breathing this time, just silence. But it was louder than any sound I'd ever heard. Story 3. I've always been used to being alone at home. My family keeps busy schedules. My dad works long shifts. My mum's often out at community meetings, and my sister practically lives at her boyfriend's place. So it's not unusual for the house to be quiet, and on this particular night that's exactly how it was. Still, something about the quiet this time felt different. Off. A kind of stillness that didn't bring peace, but tension. I was curled up on the couch in the living room, half watching a movie, half scrolling through my phone. Our cat was sleeping somewhere in another room, and even the usual background hum of the air conditioning had gone silent, leaving the entire house unnervingly hushed. That's when I heard it. At first, it was just a faint shuffle, something light brushing across the front porch. I barely registered it. The kids next door often kicked balls into our yard or left toys scattered too close to our window. I figured it was one of them, maybe retrieving something they shouldn't have lost in the first place. But then I glanced at the clock. It was a few minutes past 9. Too late for kids to be playing outside. I sat up a little straighter, tilting my head to listen. The sound came again, more definite this time, a heavy shuffle, like someone dragging their feet in gravel. I looked toward the window, but as usual the curtains were closed. Even if they had been open, a large dresser blocked part of the view. That was Mum's doing. She always thought the furniture placement made the room feel more cozy. Right now, it just made it harder to see what was outside. I got up slowly and tiptoed toward the window. Not because I was scared, at least that's what I told myself, but because something about the sound demanded quiet, stillness, like whatever was making the noise might hear me if I breathed too loudly. I reached for the edge of the curtain just enough to create a small slit and peek through. There was nothing there, just the front yard, soaked from earlier rain, the shadows from the porch light stretching long and thin across the walkway. I let the curtain fall back and turned away, trying to shake the chill that had crept up my spine. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe a squirrel or raccoon. But then it happened again, this time louder, closer. I moved to the wall and pressed my ear against it, listening. I could hear steps, deliberate, heavy ones, crunching along the gravel path that circled the house. Whatever it was had gone from the front yard to the side, and judging by the direction, it was headed toward the back porch. Now I felt something I hadn't before, dread. Not just fear, but that heavy, suffocating sensation that settles in your chest when something isn't right, when your instincts kick in and every cell in your body screams to hide. I backed away from the window and quietly slipped into the kitchen. It was darker in there, but that also meant I couldn't be seen as easily. The only light was the faint glow from the stovetop clock and the low hum of the refrigerator. I stayed still, listening. The footsteps stopped. That was somehow worse than hearing them. Silence again, deep and complete. I could feel my pulse throbbing in my ears as I crouched near the counter. Then came the creak, the unmistakable creak of someone stepping onto the wooden boards of our back porch. The boards had that distinct groan you could always hear inside the house if someone used them, and now someone, or something, was walking across them. Step, pause, step. They were moving slowly, as if taking their time, as if they were listening too. Then came another sound, the doorknob. It jiggled softly at first, like a polite knock, almost like someone testing to see if it was locked. Then more forcefully, someone was trying to open the back door. I couldn't move. My legs were locked in place. I tried to convince myself it was a neighbor, maybe someone who'd lost their way, though that didn't make any sense. Our house wasn't near any other homes. It was isolated. No one just wandered up to our back porch. Then silence again. I crept toward the laundry room door, the one that led to the back porch. I didn't want to go near it, but I needed to make sure it was locked. I pressed my ear against it and listened. Nothing. I gently twisted the lock to double check, making sure it was secure. That's when I heard it again, movement just outside the window above the sink. I dared to glance. A forehead, just a forehead, visible through the corner of the window. I froze. Our house sits on slightly raised ground, meaning that for someone to peer through that window, they'd have to be tall, very tall. I measured it in my head. I'd stood there 100 times while doing dishes, and even I couldn't see out unless I stood on tiptoe. For someone's forehead to be visible at that height, they'd need to be well over 6.5 feet tall. And there was no sound of them climbing or stepping onto anything. They were just there. I dug down, heart pounding like a war drum. Whoever or whatever it was, they weren't human. Or if they were, They were something else entirely. I scrambled away from the kitchen and into the hallway, trying not to make a sound. The stairs to the second floor were just ahead. I ran up them, 2 steps at a time, and ducked into my sister's room at the top. I shut the door silently behind me and leaned against it, trying to breathe without gasping. The window in her room was covered with blackout curtains, but I didn't feel safe. I knew that thing was still outside, and I was right. I crept over to the side of the window, where there was a tiny gap in the curtain. I pulled it back just enough to see, and there it was, standing directly below the window, staring straight ahead at the wall of our house. Not moving, just standing, watching. From that angle, I could see more of its shape now. It wasn't just tall, it was wrong, misshapen. Its arms hung too long, its posture too stiff, and though its body looked bulky, its limbs were thin, like stretched out wire beneath skin. And that skin, it looked pale, almost translucent, hairless. Bone-like ridges jutted from its shoulders and elbows, catching the moonlight in strange ways. It reached out and grabbed the handle of the old cellar door. I felt my stomach drop. The cellar was attached to the basement, an old, unused part of the house that none of us ever went into. It was filled with dust, forgotten boxes, and that unmistakable smell of damp concrete. If that thing found a way into the house through the cellar, I didn't know what I'd do. I backed away from the window, heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't know where to go next. My parents weren't home. My phone was downstairs on the couch. I was trapped upstairs with only a thin layer of drywall between me and whatever was outside. Then came the sound again. The steps moving along the side of the house. It had left the cellar door and was circling. I crawled out into the hallway and slid toward my parents' room. The door was closed and the lights were off, but it felt safer somehow. I slipped inside and crawled across the carpet to the far corner where I could watch the windows while staying hidden. I waited there, barely blinking, listening to every creak, every shift of the house. 20 minutes passed, maybe 30. Then I heard the front door. Not the sound of it opening, but the soft knock, 3 taps, slow, deliberate, followed by silence. Then 3 more. I stayed still. I didn't dare move. Eventually the knocks stopped. It was another half hour before I heard the key in the lock. It was my mum. She stepped inside, humming to herself, carrying grocery bags in both arms. I ran downstairs before she could even close the door behind her, nearly sobbing as I told her everything. She looked at me like I was telling her a ghost story. I didn't see anything on the way in, she said, trying to calm me. But the porch light was off. The curtains were still drawn, and outside the cellar door was slightly ajar. I never told anyone else. I couldn't. They'd say it was stress, imagination, or maybe even a dream. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And sometimes, when the night is quiet and the air stands still, I swear I can hear it. Walking, watching, waiting. Story 4. Some people might not believe what I'm about to say, and that's okay. Not everything has to be believed to be true. But if you're willing to give it a chance, to keep an open mind, maybe you'll see it the way I did. It happened when I was staying over at my best friend's house in New Zealand. We were both around 11 or 12 years old then, still young enough to get excited about sleepovers, but just old enough to sense when something wasn't right. Her name was Sasha. We used to be inseparable. Every weekend was either at my house or hers, trading snacks and secrets, sleeping in forts, and daring each other to stay up past midnight. This time the sleepover was at her place. It was a 1-story home, cozy and warm, with a big open living room connected to the kitchen and dining area. The bedrooms were set further back, a simple layout, easy to navigate. I remember it was sometime in late November or early December, which is summer for us in the southern hemisphere. The weather was mild, the breeze soft. The air was filled with the scent of sea salt and bushland, that familiar New Zealand freshness that makes everything feel a little more alive. Before sunset, we decided to walk down to the beach. which wasn't too far from where Sasha lived. We followed a narrow path flanked by bushes and trees. It was the kind of trail that felt both peaceful and eerie at the same time, quiet enough that you could hear your own heartbeat. As we walked, I began to feel it. That strange sensation that something was behind us, watching. I kept glancing back, but nothing was there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I told Sasha and she just laughed it off, teasing me gently. "It's all in your head," she said. "You watch too many scary movies." Maybe she was right. We returned to her house as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and violet. Her parents made dinner, simple, hearty food, and we all sat together around the table. At first it felt awkward, as it always does when you're a guest in someone else's home. But soon the conversation flowed and the tension melted. Afterwards, Sasha and I gathered a pile of blankets and cushions and began building our fort in the living room. It was our ritual. There was something magical about crawling into a homemade fortress, protected by pillows and laughter, like nothing bad could ever touch you inside. We were proud of our creation. Even though our feet stuck out from one side, it felt like a castle. Time slipped by quickly. At some point, her parents and younger sister had gone to bed, leaving us alone in our makeshift world. We whispered and giggled in the dim light of a single lamp, daring each other to share secrets and tell ghost stories. Then something caught my eye. I turned toward the large window that faced the street. Sasha's house didn't have any blinds on that side, just the sheer glass that reflected the moonlight back into the room. Outside, the street was dim, lit only by a lone lamp that stood further down the road. But that wasn't where I was looking. There, just outside the window, stood a figure. Tall, still, watching. At first, I couldn't make out the details. The distance, the dark, and the way the light hit the glass made it hard to see clearly. But as I blinked and focused, the shape came into view. It was huge, at least 7 feet tall, and its outline was unmistakably wrong. Its body was humanoid in shape, but not in movement. It stood hunched slightly forward, thick with muscle, but covered in fur, not shaggy like a dog's fur. Thicker, darker, more matted. Its face, oh God, its face! It had the snout of a wolf. A long, narrow mouth filled with gleaming white teeth, ears pointed and twitching. Eyes that glowed not red as you'd expect from horror stories, but white, reflective, like polished bone in the moonlight. Its gaze was fixed directly on our foot. I tapped Sasha's arm, whispering her name. When she turned and saw it, her breath caught in her throat. We both froze. Neither of us dared to move. The light from the kitchen cast a faint orange glow across the floor, just enough to see our own hands trembling. The living room lamp was too dim to offer protection, and switching it off would have left us in total darkness. The creature didn't move. Not at first. It simply stood there, its gaze unwavering, its mouth set in a quiet snarl, like it was waiting, studying, as if it was choosing something. I could hear Sasha's breathing quicken beside me. I knew I had to do something, anything to break the spell. I crawled toward the kitchen, toward the clock and the tiny orange light, hoping to find a way to make sense of what was happening. The clock read 1:37 a.m. Everything felt slower than it should have. My limbs were heavy, like the air itself was resisting me. Sasha followed, crawling close behind. Together we crept back to the living room, trying to stay low. That's when it turned its head. Not like a human would, not gradually. It twisted suddenly, mechanically, as if its neck had no resistance. Its eyes locked onto mine. I swear it saw me, really saw me, and not just through the window, but inside me. My thoughts, my fear, my soul. For a heartbeat I forgot how to breathe. Then it raised its hand, or what should have been a hand. Long fingers, or claws maybe, ended in curved points, each one as long as a knife. It tapped the window, once, twice. The sound was soft, but it felt deafening in the silence. We both jumped, stumbling backward and knocking over one side of our fort. The blankets tumbled, breaking the illusion of safety. Sasha grabbed my hand. "We have to go," she whispered. We ran to the kitchen light switch, turned it off, and ducked behind the island. Darkness swallowed the room, but we could still see the window illuminated faintly by the distant street lamp and the moon. The figure hadn't moved. It stood frozen, hands still against the glass, head slightly tilted, as if confused by our fear. Then it was gone, vanished. No sound, no movement, just gone. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. We sat against the kitchen cabinets, wrapped in each other's arms, waiting for dawn. When sunlight finally filtered through the windows, we dared to peek outside. There were no footprints in the dirt, no sign of anything unusual. The road was quiet, normal, empty. But that didn't mean it hadn't happened. We never told anyone, not her parents, not our friends, not even my grandmother, who I knew would have believed me. Because no matter what it was, werewolf, skinwalker, shapeshifter, or something else entirely, it had found us once, and that was enough. Even now, years later, I still wake up in the middle of the night and check the windows. I still avoid staying in rooms without curtains, and I still remember those white eyes, that twisted face, the way it stood there, as if waiting for an invitation. I don't know what it wanted, but I know it'll never really leave me. Story 5. It was the kind of day that leaves you bone tired, the kind where your body feels like it's been working for weeks instead of hours, and every step feels just a little heavier than the one before. I had spent most of the day helping my friend John move into his new house. It was just the two of us, no professional movers, no extra hands, just two guys, lugging boxes up and down stairs, hauling furniture through narrow hallways, and trying not to drop anything too important. The new house was decent, nothing fancy, but it had potential. An older build, tucked away on the edge of a sleepy neighborhood, slightly worn around the edges but livable, and most importantly, it was his. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, we were still working. The last of the heavier items had been shifted into place, but dozens of boxes still sat waiting to be unpacked. I could feel the ache in my shoulders from carrying a sofa that really had no business being as heavy as it was. John, seeing how worn out I looked, offered for me to crash at his place for the night. There was an extra bed in the basement, he said. I could sleep there and we'd finish the last bits in the morning. At that point, I didn't need convincing. I agreed almost immediately. The idea of driving home through dark roads and half an hour of quiet highways just didn't appeal to me, not with how exhausted I was. Besides, a free place to sleep and a couple of beers with a friend sounded like the perfect way to end the day. The basement was simple, clean, mostly empty except for a few pieces of spare furniture and some random tools tucked into corners. The bed he offered me was decent, soft enough, nothing to complain about. I lay back, listening to the faint creaks of the old house settling into its foundations. There was a faint hum coming from the furnace, which stood tucked in the far corner of the basement, barely visible in the dim lighting. I scrolled through my phone for a bit, then drifted off, the weight of the day finally catching up to me. But sleep didn't come easy. Around midnight I woke to a faint sound. At first I thought it was the house again. Old places make strange noises, but this was different. It was subtle, rhythmic, almost like soft footsteps, or maybe something being dragged lightly across the concrete floor. I sat up, ears perked, trying to locate the direction of the sound. The room was dark, but I could still make out shapes. The furnace, the boxed shelves, the staircase to the main floor. The sound came again. A soft scrape, a shift in the air. I waited, heart beating just a little too fast. Eventually the noise faded and I convinced myself it was mice, or the house settling, or something equally unthreatening. I lay back down and tried to relax, telling myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe I was just keyed up from the long day and the unfamiliar environment, that's all. But still, even with that excuse in mind, I didn't sleep well. Morning came, grey and muted, the kind of light that makes everything feel washed out. I went upstairs, bleary-eyed, and found John already in the kitchen, sipping coffee and munching on toast. He asked how I slept. I said, fine, but I also mentioned the strange sounds I'd heard in the night. I expected him to laugh it off or say I was dreaming, but instead, his eyebrows drew together. He told me he had heard odd sounds too, coming from different parts of the house over the past few days, but he'd assumed it was just him adjusting to the new place. Old houses do that, he said. We shrugged it off, both trying to seem more relaxed than we felt, and got back to work. The final few boxes were ready to be unpacked and moved down into the basement, where John planned to set up some storage and a workspace. As I carried a heavy box down the stairs, the tape on the bottom gave out. The contents, books mostly, spilled out across the floor. I cursed under my breath, knelt down and started scooping them up. That's when I noticed something. A small handle, barely visible, half hidden beneath the stairs, tucked into the shadows. It was flush with the floor and looked like part of a hidden panel. One of those things you wouldn't notice unless you were on your hands and knees in just the right light. I blinked, unsure of what I was seeing. I called John over. "What is that?" I asked, pointing to the handle. He crouched beside me, squinting. Never saw that before." He gave it a gentle tug. To our surprise, the floor lifted, a hidden trap door, heavy and old. Dust puffed up into the air as we opened it, revealing a narrow set of stairs leading downward. The space was dark. There were no lights, no windows, just a narrow concrete passage that disappeared into the shadows. At first we just stared at it. Neither of us said a word. Then curiosity took over. John grabbed a flashlight and we both descended carefully, one step at a time. The stairs led to a small, hidden room, maybe 10 feet by 8. The air was thick and musty, stale like something sealed off for years. And someone had been living there. There was a rolled-up sleeping bag in one corner, empty water bottles scattered across the floor, wrappers, a couple of old magazines, all of it neatly tucked away as if someone had been staying there, hiding there. There was no sign of anyone at the moment, but the space told a story we couldn't ignore. We left the room in stunned silence and closed the hatch. Our hearts beat in unison, fast and unsettled. Someone had been in that house. Someone had found that hidden space and used it as shelter. But when and why? We searched the entire house. Every room, every closet, even the backyard. Nothing. Whoever it was had vanished. But the evidence remained, whispering of late-night movements and hidden breathing. We didn't know how long they had been there or if they'd come back. We told a few friends about what we found, but no one believed us. We considered calling the police, but there was no crime to report. No damage, no signs of forced entry, just a hidden space and the uneasy truth that someone had been living beneath us without our knowledge. That night, I didn't stay over. I drove home instead, the road empty, the sky grey, and my thoughts tangled. I couldn't stop thinking about the faint sounds from the night before, the dragging, the quiet scrape, the feeling of not being alone, even when everything looked normal. John eventually put a padlock on the hatch, but that didn't stop the unease. Sometimes he called me and said he heard movement again. Other times he told me he dreamed of someone standing at the top of the stairs watching him sleep. Whether it was real or not, we'll never know. But that room, hidden and silent, buried beneath the stairs, still exists, still waits. And sometimes, when a floorboard creaks too loudly or a door shifts open without wind, I remember it. Because some people don't need to break in. Some are already inside. Story 6. It was the kind of friendship that made everything feel simpler. Robert and I had been close since 2nd grade, the kind of kids who always knew what the other one was thinking. We were practically glued together throughout our early school years, from recess games to weekend movie marathons. We didn't need plans, we just needed each other's company. His house was like a second home to me. Nothing about it felt unfamiliar. His mum made great pancakes, his dad played backyard catch with us, and the upstairs bedroom where we spent countless sleepovers was a safe haven filled with games, comic books, and old action figures. So when Robert invited me over for another sleepover, I didn't hesitate. His dad was out of town on business, and we figured we'd make the most of the night. We played video games for hours, taking breaks only to grab chips or soda. His mum came in around 10, told us it was time for bed. We brushed it off at first, trying to get in one last round of our favourite fighting game. Eventually we turned off the console, shut off the lights and settled in for the night. Him in his bed, me in my sleeping bag on the floor, next to it. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of the old clock on the wall. I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the night settle around me. It was one of those moments where time seemed to pause, like the whole world had gone still. My eyes began to drift shut, the weight of the day finally pulling me into a shallow sleep. Then I felt it, that sense of not being alone. I opened my eyes slowly, expecting to see Robert awake, maybe fidgeting or talking in his sleep. But he was still, peaceful, breathing steadily in the dim glow from the hallway light that spilled through the open bedroom door. That's when I saw it. There was someone standing in the hallway, a shadowy figure, motionless, just beyond the doorway. At first I thought it must be Robert's dad. Maybe he had come back early, standing there half asleep, checking on us. That seemed like the only reasonable explanation. The silhouette was tall, broad-shouldered and unmoving. It didn't speak. It didn't shift. It just stood there. I watched it, trying to convince myself that I was dreaming, that maybe the flicker of hallway light was playing tricks on my eyes, but no matter how many times I blinked, it was still there. I closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep, told myself not to be ridiculous. The mind sees what it wants to see, especially in the dark. Eventually I drifted off again, the unease never fully leaving me. The next morning the scent of cereal and milk pulled me out of my haze. Robert was already dressed, sitting at the table, eating. We chatted casually as if nothing had happened. Then he mentioned that his dad would be home later that day. And that's when it hit me. His dad had been out of town. I froze mid-bite. My spoon hovered over my bowl, my appetite suddenly gone. I remembered the figure, the silhouette in the hallway. It couldn't have been his dad. He wasn't home. He never came home. I asked Robert if anyone had visited during the night, if maybe someone came over unexpectedly. He shook his head. I hesitated for a long moment before telling him what I saw. He didn't laugh. He didn't roll his eyes or tease me. Instead, he looked genuinely surprised and worried. We walked through the house, checking windows and doors. Nothing looked out of place. Everything was locked. Then we headed down to the basement, where the guest room was located. It wasn't used often, mostly for holidays or family visits. When we opened the door, our hearts sank. The room was a mess. Blankets pulled from the bed, drawers open, the window unlocked and slightly ajar. Robert stared at it in disbelief. He said it had been cleaned just a few days ago, that nobody had been in the room, that his mum always kept it neat just in case. We didn't know what to think. A prank? A misunderstanding? A burglar who changed their mind? Robert ran upstairs to get his mum. She came down a few minutes later, saw the state of the room, and immediately called the police. When the officers arrived, they took everything seriously. They examined the room, the window, the hallway. They asked questions. How long had it been like that? Had anything gone missing? Did we see anyone suspicious? We told them what we could. They couldn't find any fingerprints. No signs of forced entry. Just that open window and a creeping sense of something wrong. Later, the officer said someone might have been living in the basement for a few days. That maybe they'd snuck in through the window and stayed hidden until we stumbled upon the truth, but they couldn't be sure. Whoever it was, they were gone now. Or at least, we hoped they were. I didn't sleep over at Robert's house again after that. Not for a long time. I still visited, still hung out like we always did, but when the sun went down, I went home. That hallway haunted me. The stillness of the figure, the silence, the way it just watched. It wasn't like a person trying to hide. It didn't move like someone caught in the act. It stood there like it belonged there, like it had every right to be part of the house. And that's what unsettled me the most. Not the idea of someone breaking in, but the idea of someone who never had to. We still talk about it, Robert and I. Years have gone by, but neither of us can forget that night. We never figured out who the man was, why he was there, or how long he had been inside. We only know he was watching, and for a moment, we were seen by something we didn't understand. Some people fear things that go bump in the night. I fear the things that don't. The ones that simply stand there, watching, waiting. Story 7. It was supposed to be a weekend to remember. One of those rare, exciting school trips where the entire team got to stay overnight. A football retreat at the field house. For most of the guys, it was about camaraderie, late-night jokes, and the thrill of being away from home without adult supervision hovering over every move. For me, it was a break from the monotony. A chance to relax, to breathe, and to be around people my own age in a way that didn't feel like a daily routine. We arrived that Friday evening just as the last light of the sun slipped beyond the hills. The air was cool but not uncomfortable. It smelled of freshly cut grass and rain clouds that hadn't yet arrived. The field house itself was nothing special. Brick walls, a creaky gym floor, locker rooms that echoed with even the quietest footsteps. Still, it held the weight of memories. Older students had passed down stories of epic sleepovers, of pranks and ghost tales that echoed across the empty halls. Most of us laughed them off. We were here for fun, not superstition. After dinner, a group of us went to the small computer lab attached to the main hallway. It had a few outdated desktops, flickering monitors, and a makeshift network that barely kept up with our games. Still, we managed to get a few matches of our favorite shooter running, the laughter and trash talk quickly filling the room. It was just the right mix of competitive energy and harmless fun. But then it started. At first, it was just a movement in the corner of my eye. I glanced up from the screen and thought I saw someone in the adjacent room, the one next to the computer lab, a storage space no one had used in years. It had a small window that looked into our room, and I thought I saw something move behind it. Not fast, just a slow shift, a silhouette. I leaned forward, staring at the window, waiting to see if it would happen again. The other guys were still shouting at the game, oblivious. When nothing else moved, I told myself I imagined it. I tried to laugh it off, focus on the screen again, but something deep in my gut told me it wasn't nothing. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching from that room. About 20 minutes later, we decided to head back to the main hall where the sleeping bags were laid out. The lights in the field house were dim, just a few emergency bulbs lining the hallways, casting everything in that dull yellow haze that makes even familiar spaces feel eerie. I kept glancing behind me, expecting to see someone there, but there was only shadow. We sat up near the far end of the gym, near the row of windows that overlooked the football field. It was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. The others chatted for a bit, then slowly, one by one, fell asleep. I lay there for a while, not tired, just thinking. My eyes wandered to the windows. That's when I saw him. A man, standing in the middle of the field. He wasn't moving, just standing still, facing our window. His form was silhouetted by the moonlight, but I could make out enough to know he wasn't one of us. Too tall, too rigid. He didn't belong here. For a long time, I thought maybe it was one of the coaches or an old groundskeeper making a late-night check. But as the seconds stretched on and the figure remained motionless, I knew something was wrong. I sat up slowly. My movement stirred one of the other guys nearby. He turned to me groggily, rubbing his eyes. I whispered, asking if he could see the man on the field. He froze. He saw him too. We watched together, waiting for the man to move, to walk away, to do anything, but he just stood there, watching us. Eventually, the figure did move, but not in a way that brought comfort. It was slow, deliberate. He took one step forward, then another, each one echoing across the silence like a warning. We couldn't hear his footsteps, but we could feel the presence inching closer. We ducked behind one of the benches, trying to hide, unsure of what to do. The rest of the group was still asleep. I didn't want to wake them, not yet. Not unless we were sure. We peeked out again. He was gone, vanished from the field. We stared into the night, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, not a shadow, not a sound. Eventually, too afraid to sleep, I lay back down and just listened. That's when I heard it. A voice, right outside the window, whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but the cadence chilled me. It didn't sound angry. It didn't even sound human. Just a low, steady murmur that slid through the cracks in the glass and wrapped itself around my ears. I lay frozen, staring at the ceiling, heart racing. It went on for what felt like hours. Morning came slowly. When the sun finally rose, everything seemed normal. Too normal. The field was empty. The gym was quiet. The others woke up, stretching and joking as if the night hadn't been soaked in dread. I found the guy who had seen the figure with me and asked if he still remembered. He nodded, said he'd thought about it all night, but didn't want to talk about it. He was afraid the others would laugh. I told him I understood. Later that afternoon, one of the coaches mentioned that the field house had been built near a cemetery. I didn't think much of it at the time, plenty of buildings are near graveyards. But something about the way he said it, casually, like an afterthought, stuck with me. I never forgot that night. Even now, years later, I remember the figure on the field, the whisper at the window, the feeling of being watched by something that didn't belong to the world we knew. There are things out there we can't explain, and sometimes they don't need to move fast to terrify you. Sometimes they only need to stand and wait. Story 8. It happened during the winter of the late 1990s, in a place where silence lived in the trees and darkness settled early. My family and I were living in a cabin nestled deep in the woods of Colorado, far removed from the rhythms of suburban life. When I say deep, I mean the nearest town, store, or neighbor was over 30 minutes away by car. It was the kind of place people romanticize in stories, quiet, secluded, and surrounded by towering pines. But there was a weight to the quiet that you only understand once you've lived in it. And that winter, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy, like something was waiting just beyond the trees. My dad worked nights, so most evenings it was just my mum and me. On this particular night, the snow had fallen hard, blanketing everything in a thick white hush. It was around 10:30 p.m. when we finished dinner. I was washing dishes while my mum cleaned up the rest of the kitchen. The cabin had one main kitchen window that overlooked the side of the house. That window was always a little foggy from the heat inside meeting the cold glass outside, and I often wiped it down just to look at the snow piling up. As I was rinsing a plate under the cold tap, I saw something. At first, it was just a vague shape beyond the glass, a smudge in the darkness. I assumed it was snow drifting by, but then it didn't move. It lingered, so I wiped the window with the towel hanging on the oven door, pressing my face close to the cold glass. There was a man standing there. He was right outside the window. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, staring in. I flinched and stumbled back, my heart slamming in my chest. My mum turned around and asked what was wrong. I pointed toward the window, my voice shaking, but when she looked, there was nothing there, just the trees, the snow, the dark. I saw someone, I said, right there, a man. My mum looked skeptical. She walked over to the window, squinting into the night. But there was no sign of anyone. She told me I was probably seeing things. Maybe my reflection, maybe a branch, maybe just a trick of the eye. But I knew what I saw. As I stood there, still rattled, I started to doubt myself. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it really was just the mix of cold and shadow playing tricks. That's what I told myself, until the light went out. The motion sensor light on the outside of the house suddenly shut off. And just before it did, I caught it again. That face, watching. Then, before either of us could react, a beam of blinding light pierced through the window, directly into my eyes. I turned away, shielding my face, blinking furiously. My mum hadn't seen the flashlight. She had her back to the window, but I knew someone had just shined it at me, deliberately. That's when she finally believed me. I told her someone was outside, and she started to panic. We checked all the doors and made sure everything was locked. My mum picked up the phone and tried calling my dad, but his phone went unanswered. He worked far enough away that even if he left right then, it would still take him at least half an hour to get home. We were alone, trapped in a snow-covered house, surrounded by miles of trees. The worst part was that the man hadn't tried to hide. Whoever he was, he wanted us to know he was there. He wanted to be seen. That's when we heard the doorknob rattle. At first it was just a soft jiggle, like someone gently testing it. Then it became more aggressive, more insistent, as if someone was trying to force it open. My mum grabbed the kitchen knife. I did the same. We backed away from the door, breathing hard. Then the pounding started. A loud, violent thud. Again and again. The door shook in its frame, each blow heavier than the last. It was no longer just someone trying to scare us. He was trying to get in, and we were defenseless. I remember staring at the door, waiting for it to splinter. Every time the hinges groaned, I thought they would give. My mum kept whispering to stay calm, but her hands were shaking. The only thing between us and the man was a few inches of wood. Then headlights cut through the dark. Bright beams swept across the yard, illuminating the snow-covered ground and the man on our porch. My dad's truck had pulled into the driveway. The man saw it too. He turned and ran, vanishing into the trees before my dad could even see him. My dad rushed inside, confused and panicked. We told him everything. The man, the flashlight, the banging on the door. He didn't question us. He saw the fear on our faces. He called the police, and they arrived a little after midnight. They searched the perimeter, followed footprints that disappeared deep into the woods, found drag marks near the porch like someone had been crouching or hiding. But they never found him. Not that night. Not ever. A few days later, we were called back to the station. They asked us to look at a few photographs. One of them showed a man with sunken eyes, wearing a torn coat and filthy jeans. I recognized him immediately. It was him, the man at the window. They told us he had been arrested while trying to break into another cabin a few towns over. When they caught him, he had rope, a hunting knife, and a pair of handcuffs in his backpack. That's when everything sank in. He hadn't come to scare us. He had come for something much worse. If my dad hadn't arrived when he did, if that light hadn't swept across the porch at just the right moment, I don't want to imagine what might have happened. I don't want to think about what he was planning. We moved out of that cabin within a few months. My dad, along with a few close friends, helped build a new home for us, closer to town. Safer, but that winter night never left me. I still think about the man, the flashlight, the door rattling under pressure, and the eyes. Because even now, decades later, when the world is quiet and the snow starts to fall, I sometimes see them in my dreams. Those eyes. Unblinking, unmoving, waiting. Story 9. There's something strange about childhood friendships, the way they form out of nowhere, often with no real reason, just proximity or timing. That's how it was with David. He wasn't someone I knew particularly well. We'd spoken a few times at school, shared a class or two, but we weren't close, not really. He had joined our school the year before, and though he was friendly, there was always something off about him. Not in a frightening way, just in the kind of way that makes you notice someone without knowing why. One Friday afternoon, seemingly out of nowhere, David invited me over for a sleepover. I remember feeling surprised. It was unexpected. We weren't exactly friends, but he asked with such casual confidence that I didn't know how to say no, so I didn't. I said I'd ask my mum. She said yes. Later that evening, she dropped me off at his house, a quiet suburban place tucked near the end of a cul-de-sac. It was neat, well maintained, almost eerily so. David met me at the door. He was polite, excited even. He showed me around like a tour guide, kitchen, living room, his bedroom. His room was filled with comic books, action figures and posters of video game characters. There was something meticulous about how everything was arranged, as if every object had been placed with intention. We played video games for a while, Mario Kart and Super Smash Bros. And I remember thinking maybe I had misjudged him. He was just a little odd, maybe lonely. But as the evening wore on, the unease began to creep back in. It was subtle at first. David would sometimes stop mid-sentence and stare off for a few seconds, as if he was listening to something I couldn't hear. His smile would linger a little too long. His questions started to get more personal, not in a curious way, but in a probing, needling way. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just socially awkward. I'd spent the night at weirder houses. Eventually his mum told us it was time for bed. She seemed kind but tired, like someone carrying a weight they couldn't talk about. David crawled into his bed and I unrolled my sleeping bag on the floor beside him. The room was dimly lit by a nightlight plugged into the wall, casting a soft orange glow that made the shadows stretch long and thin. I lay there, listening to the faint creaks of the house settling, the rhythmic ticking of a clock somewhere down the hallway. It was a stillness I usually enjoyed, but not this time. A few hours later, I woke up in a sweat. The room felt too warm, the air too thick. I tried to kick off the blanket, but it was tucked tightly around me. That's when I realized something was wrong. There was another blanket over my head, one I hadn't placed there. I sat up quickly, pulling it off. My heart was pounding. I looked around the room. Everything seemed normal. David was still lying in his bed, staring up at the ceiling. But he was awake, and he was watching me. I asked him why he had put the blanket over my head. He didn't respond at first. Then, without turning his head, he said, "I didn't." But I knew he was lying. The way his voice wavered, the slight twitch in his jaw. I asked again more firmly. He turned toward me, his face red, eyes narrowed, and said, "Stop blaming me for stuff. I didn't do anything." I felt the air in the room shift. It was no longer just uncomfortable, it was threatening. I lay back down trying to calm myself, telling myself it was just a weird moment, that I'd be home in the morning. But sleep didn't come easy. Eventually though, exhaustion won out and I drifted off. When I woke again, the room was empty. David was gone. I sat up, rubbed my eyes and looked around. Maybe he went to the bathroom, I thought. I stood and stretched, then walked over to the door to check. It was locked from the outside. Panic bloomed in my chest. I tried the handle again, jiggling it, then knocking. Nothing. I shouted David's name. Still nothing. I sat back down, my hands trembling. My phone was still in my backpack, and I quickly dug it out. I called my mum. She answered immediately. I told her everything, that I was locked in David's room, that he was gone, that something was wrong. She didn't hesitate. She said she was already in the car. That made me pause. "How did you know something was wrong?" I asked. "I just had a feeling," she replied. "A strong one." 20 minutes later I heard footsteps down the hallway. I jumped up expecting to see David or maybe his mum, but it wasn't them. It was David's mum. She opened the door looking surprised. "Oh," she said. "You're still here?" I nodded, too confused to respond. She glanced down the hall. "Your mum's outside." I gathered my things and left without seeing David. Not a word, not a goodbye. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I didn't tell my mum everything, just that it had been weird and I didn't want to go back. She didn't press. But that night, as I was getting ready for bed, she called out to me from the living room. "There's someone here to see you." I walked out and saw David standing at our front door. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. He asked why I left without saying goodbye. I told him he had locked me in his room, that I didn't know where he went, that it wasn't okay. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. Then he said something I'll never forget. "I just wanted to see what you'd do." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away. 15 minutes later, The window to my room shattered. Glass sprayed across my floor. I wasn't near it, thankfully, but my parents came running. We looked outside. David was running down the street. My parents called his parents. We heard yelling through the phone and then silence. After that night, I never saw him at school again. No one said where he went. He just disappeared. But sometimes, when I'm walking alone or drifting off to sleep, I still feel like I'm being watched, not by someone curious, but by someone testing me to see what I'll do.